I said I settled because I was getting old. He overheard and filed for divorce. I need to tell someone what I did, and you're going to think I'm terrible, but there's something about being married that nobody talks about. It's the little lies we tell ourselves to make peace with our choices. The stories we construct to feel better about the compromises we made. I told myself one of those stories for 3 years, whispered it to my best friend over wine like it was some kind of wisdom, and my husband overheard every single word. He filed for divorce 2 days later and everyone thinks he's being dramatic. But here's what they don't know: what he heard wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what I said after that, the thing I've never told anyone, and it changes everything. If I don't tell this story, you'll never understand why I'm sitting in a lawyer's office right now fighting for a marriage I'm not even sure I want to save. But once you know what I know, you'll see why I can't just let him go. This isn't just about a careless comment overheard at the wrong moment. It's about the fear that I've wasted my entire adult life chasing the wrong things, and now that I finally have what I thought I wanted, I don't recognize myself anymore. I'm going to tell you everything, including what I said after he left the room that night. The part that makes me look worst, I'm saving that for later because you need to understand who I was before that dinner party. You need to know about the years of watching friends get engaged while I dated men who wouldn't commit, the baby showers I attended while my dating apps went cold, the holidays where my mother asked in that particular tone if I was seeing anyone special. You need to understand the desperation that builds when you're 37 and you've done everything right except find the one thing society tells you matters most. I met Daniel when I was 38. By then, I'd been through so many relationships that ended the same way. Men who loved me but weren't ready. Men who were ready but didn't love me enough. Men who wanted different things or lived in different cities or had emotional availability issues that required years of therapy I didn't have time to wait for. I'd started to believe the problem was me, that I was too demanding or not understanding enough or fundamentally unlovable in some way I couldn't see. Daniel was different. That's what I told myself from the beginning. He was 42, divorced, financially stable, and actively looking for a serious relationship. He said so in his dating profile. On our first date he told me he wanted to get married again, that his divorce had taught him what really mattered, that he was ready to build a life with someone. I remember the relief that flooded through me when he said those words. Finally someone who wanted what I wanted. He wasn't my usual type. My exes had been charismatic in that slightly unreliable way, creative types with big dreams and inconsistent follow-through. Daniel was an accountant. He wore sensible shoes and planned vacations months in advance, and had a retirement portfolio he'd started in his 20s. On our third date, he showed me a spreadsheet he'd made comparing mortgage rates. I found it endearing, or I told myself I did. The thing about getting older and still being single is that you start to recalibrate what matters. The butterflies, the breathless attraction, the feeling of being so drawn to someone you can't think straight. I did all that before and it had never worked out. So when I felt a pleasant warmth toward Daniel instead of explosive chemistry, I thought maybe that meant something. Maybe the problem with my past relationships was that I'd been chasing the wrong feeling all along. Maybe real love was supposed to be steady and comfortable and safe. We got engaged after 8 months. Everyone was thrilled. My mother cried with what I'm pretty sure was relief. My friends threw me a beautiful engagement party and told me how lucky I was to have found someone so solid and dependable. My younger sister, who'd got married at 26, said she was glad I'd finally found my person. And I was happy. I was. The wedding planning gave me something to focus on, something to prove that I'd made it, that I hadn't been left behind after all. But here's the thing nobody tells you about getting what you thought you wanted. It doesn't erase all the years of not having it. It doesn't heal the wound of feeling undesirable and unwanted. And it doesn't stop you from wondering if you chose this person because you loved him or because you were terrified of being alone. I pushed those thoughts away. I told myself every bride had cold feet, that doubt was normal, that marriage was a choice you made every day and the feelings would deepen over time. Daniel was kind. He was consistent. He showed up when he said he would and remembered my coffee order and called his mother every Sunday. These were good things, important things, things my exes had never managed. We got married on a Saturday in October and it was beautiful. The weather cooperated, the flowers looked perfect, and Daniel cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. In the photos, I'm smiling. I remember being present in those moments, genuinely happy that this chapter of my life was finally beginning. If there was a small voice asking whether I was happy to marry Daniel specifically, or just happy to be getting married at all, I drowned it out with champagne and dancing. The first year was fine. Good even. We bought a house in the suburbs and I threw myself into decorating it. I posted pictures on social media of our kitchen renovations and our garden and our weekend brunches. I liked being able to say my husband in casual conversation. I liked having plans for holidays and someone to split bills with and a person who would reliably be there on Friday nights. It wasn't passionate, but it was comfortable. I thought that's what marriage was supposed to become anyway. But by the second year, something started to shift. The comfort began to feel less like security and more like boredom. Daniel's predictability, which I'd once found reassuring, started to irritate me. I knew exactly what he'd say about any given topic. I could predict his reactions, his weekend routines, his opinions on movies before we watched them. There was no mystery, no surprise, no spark of the unknown. I started comparing our relationship to my friends' marriages and convincing myself everyone felt this way. Marriage was work, people said. It wasn't supposed to be exciting all the time. The early infatuation phase always faded. This was normal. I just needed to adjust my expectations. Then one night we were at a dinner party at my friend Lauren's house. She'd invited several couples and we were all drinking wine and talking about relationships in that way you do when you're trying to sound wise and knowing. Someone asked how we'd known our partners were the one, and people started sharing their stories. Thunderbolt moments, undeniable connections, feelings of absolute certainty. When they got to me, I hesitated. I couldn't tell a story like that because I didn't have one. What I had was a growing sense of panic at 38 and a man who checked all the right boxes. So I laughed and took a long sip of wine and said something I thought was honest and funny and relatable. I mean, let's be real, I said. I settled because I was getting old. Everyone went quiet for a second, then someone laughed nervously, and I kept going, emboldened by the wine and the assumption that I was among friends who understood the unspoken pressures women face. I'm not saying I don't love Daniel, I continued. But if I'm being completely honest, I was 38, my eggs were practically dust, and he was the first guy in years who actually wanted to get married. Sometimes you just have to be practical, you know? A few people laughed, that uncomfortable laugh that's more about relieving tension than actual amusement. Lauren looked concerned. But I was on a roll now, feeling like I was finally saying something true after years of pretending everything was perfect. Like, was he my dream guy? No. Did I have this overwhelming, sweep me off my feet feeling? Also no. But he's stable and kind and he wanted the same timeline I did. At some point you have to stop waiting for the perfect thing and just accept the good enough thing, right? That's when I saw Daniel standing in the doorway to the kitchen. I don't know how long he'd been there. His face was completely blank, which was somehow worse than if he'd looked angry. He was holding a bottle of wine he'd apparently gone to get from the kitchen, and he just stood there looking at me like he'd never seen me before. Daniel, I started, but he just turned and walked away. I tried to laugh it off, told everyone I was kidding, that the wine had gotten to me. But the party never recovered its energy. We left 20 minutes later. Daniel drove home in complete silence while I tried to explain and apologize and take it back. He didn't say a single word until we got home, and then all he said was, "I'm sleeping in the guest room." I thought we'd talk about it in the morning. I thought I could explain that I was joking, exaggerating, saying something provocative for laughs. But when I woke up, Daniel was gone. He'd left a note saying he was staying at his brother's place and needed time to think. He didn't come home for 3 days. When he finally did, it was with a lawyer's business card and a request that I find somewhere else to stay while we figured things out. I was stunned. We'd had arguments before, times when we'd annoyed each other or disagreed, but nothing like this. I'd said something stupid at a party, something I didn't even fully mean. Surely that didn't warrant this kind of reaction. "You settle for me," he said, and his voice was so flat and dead. "You married me because you were desperate and running out of time. Not because you loved me, not because you wanted me specifically, because I was convenient." I tried to argue, to tell him that wasn't what I meant, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. Because here's the thing I couldn't admit to him, the thing I'm still barely admitting to myself: he wasn't entirely wrong. Over the next week I tried everything. I apologized. I sent long texts explaining context and intent. I showed up at his brother's place and begged him to come to couples therapy. He agreed to 1 session and I thought that was progress. I thought if I could just get him in a room with a neutral third party, I could make him understand that what I'd said wasn't the whole truth. But therapy made everything worse. The therapist asked me directly, "Do you love your husband?" And I said yes, of course I did. Then she asked, "Would you have married him if you'd met him at 25? And I froze. Because the honest answer was no. At 25, I would have thought Daniel was boring. I would have wanted someone more exciting, more spontaneous, more aligned with the person I thought I'd become. I only appreciated what Daniel offered because I'd spent 13 years failing to find it. Daniel watched me hesitate, and something in his expression just closed off. After the session, he told me he'd filed for divorce. I'd received the papers later that week. Here's what I haven't told anyone yet, the part that makes me look like the worst kind of person. That night at Lauren's, after Daniel walked away and I tried to laugh it off, someone asked if I was okay. And you know what I said? I said, "He'll get over it. Where else is he going to find someone at 45? I said it quietly to just one person, but Lauren heard. She hasn't spoken to me since. And the thing is, I meant it. In that moment, riding high on wine and the safety of thinking Daniel hadn't heard my original comment, I was annoyed that he was being sensitive. I thought his options were limited enough that he'd have to forgive me. I thought I held more cards than he did. I was wrong about that. Turns out, a financially stable man in his mid-40s who wants a serious relationship has plenty of options. It's women pushing 40 who are apparently disposable. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, which felt like a diplomatic way of saying, my wife publicly admitted she married me as a last resort. My friends split down the middle. Half thought Daniel was overreacting to a thoughtless comment. Half thought I'd revealed something unforgivable. My mother asked what I'd expected, saying those kinds of things out loud. My sister stopped returning my calls. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment and started seeing a therapist alone. She asked me a lot of questions I didn't want to answer. Did I actually love Daniel? Had I ever been in love with him? What was I grieving, the loss of him or the loss of being married? I couldn't answer her honestly because I didn't know. The truth kept shifting depending on the day. Some mornings I woke up missing Daniel desperately, remembering small kindnesses and the way he'd bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. Other days I felt nothing but relief that I didn't have to keep pretending everything was fine. What I definitely grieved was the story I'd been able to tell about my life. The story where I'd found love eventually, and proved everyone wrong about being too picky or too career-focused or too whatever. Now I was back to being a cautionary tale, except worse. Now I was the woman who'd had it all and thrown it away by being careless and cruel. Daniel started dating someone new 4 months after filing. I know because mutual friends told me, their voices carefully neutral like they were delivering news of a death. She's 32. She works in marketing. She has one of those faces that's effortlessly pretty without makeup. I've looked at her social media more times than I want to admit, studying her photos for flaws I never find. I imagine him telling her about me, about his first marriage. I wonder if he says I settled for him, or if he's rewritten the story to make himself less pathetic. I wonder if she makes him feel the way I never did, if he has butterflies and chemistry and all the things I convinced myself didn't matter. Meanwhile, I downloaded dating apps again and felt the same sinking dread I'd felt before Daniel. Except now I'm 41 instead of 38, and those 3 years feel enormous. My profile says I'm divorced, which apparently is a red flag to a lot of men. The ones who do match with me are either significantly older, recently separated and clearly not over it, or looking for something casual that I definitely don't want. I went on a date with a 46-year-old lawyer who seemed promising. We had a nice dinner, good conversation, genuine laughs. At the end of the night, he said he'd had a great time but was actually getting back together with his ex. I went home and cried for 2 hours, which was definitely not a proportional response to a first date with a stranger. My therapist says I'm grieving multiple things at once: my marriage, my imagined future, my younger self's dreams, my fertility window that's rapidly closing. She says it's normal to feel unmoored when the life plan you've been following falls apart. She asks what I want now, independent of age or social pressure or fear. I don't have an answer. Or I have too many answers that contradict each other. Some days I want Daniel back so badly I can't breathe. I draft texts I never send, apologizing again, explaining again, begging for another chance. I think about all the ways I could have been different, could have appreciated him more, could have stopped comparing what we had to some imaginary perfect relationship that probably doesn't exist. Other days I feel like I dodged a bullet. Like if we'd stayed married, I'd have spent the next 40 years feeling vaguely dissatisfied and wondering what I'd missed. Like the divorce was painful but necessary, forcing me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. And then there are the days, the ones I feel most ashamed of, where I'm just angry at Daniel for not getting over it. Where I think he's being oversensitive and punishing me too harshly for one stupid comment. Where I resent him for dating someone new while I'm struggling to get a second date. Where I think I did settle, but so what? Isn't that what everyone does eventually? Isn't marriage always a compromise between what you want and what's actually available? 6 months after the divorce papers arrived, Daniel agreed to meet me for coffee. I'd been asking for weeks, and he finally relented. I prepared what I wanted to say, a real apology, not defensive or qualified, just acknowledging that I'd hurt him and it was unforgivable. But when I saw him looking happy and healthy and like he'd been sleeping well, something in me just broke. Instead of apologizing, I asked him if he'd ever really loved me or if he just wanted to be married to anyone. I asked if I was convenient for him too, if he'd settled just as much as I had. He looked at me with something like pity. I loved you completely, he said. I would have chosen you at any age in any circumstance. That was the difference between us. Then he left, and I knew it was really over. The next few months were a blur of sadness and anger and shame that cycled through on repeat. I told myself I was better off alone than in a marriage where I felt lukewarm. Then I told myself I'd thrown away something precious because I was too stupid to appreciate it. Then I told myself I was a victim of impossible standards for women and biological clocks, and a culture that made me feel worthless without a partner. All of these things felt true and false at the same time. Work became my focus because it was the only area of my life that felt stable. I took on extra projects, stayed late, volunteered for assignments no one else wanted. My boss was thrilled. My therapist was concerned. I told her I was fine, that staying busy was healthy, but really I just couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts. I started following Daniel on social media again, which I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. He'd blocked me initially, but he must have unblocked me at some point, and his posts showed up in my feed like little grenades. Him and the new girlfriend at a concert. Him hiking with friends. Him at his niece's birthday party, looking relaxed in a way I never quite managed to make him look. I noticed she touched him constantly in photos. Little gestures, her hand on his arm, leaning into him, their body language screaming comfort and affection. I didn't remember touching Daniel that way. I'd been affectionate, I thought, but maybe in a performative way, checking a box. Maybe he'd felt the difference. One night, after too much wine and too much scrolling, I sent him a message. I told him I'd been wrong about everything. That I did love him, that I'd been stupid and scared and sabotaged something good because I couldn't handle my own insecurities. I told him I wanted to try again, that I'd do therapy, that I'd work on myself, that I understood now what I'd thrown away. He responded the next morning with one line, "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it's not going to be with me." I called in sick to work and spent the day in bed, oscillating between crying and numbness. My best friend came over that evening and found me still in pajamas, surrounded by tissues and empty ice cream containers like some rom-com clique. "You need to stop torturing yourself," she said. "You need to grieve and move on." But how do you grieve something you're not sure you actually wanted? How do you move on when you can't figure out if you made a terrible mistake or a narrow escape? My friend suggested I date casually. Nothing serious, just remember how to connect with people. So I tried. I went on dates with men who were fine, perfectly acceptable, and felt absolutely nothing. Or I went on dates with men I was actually attracted to who made it clear they weren't interested in anything long-term. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd settled for Daniel because I wanted security, and now I couldn't find anyone worth settling for. I ran into Daniel and his girlfriend at a farmer's market 8 months post-filing. They were buying vegetables together, and she was laughing at something he'd said, and they looked so casual and happy that I wanted to disappear. Daniel saw me and nodded politely. The girlfriend didn't know who I was. Why would she? I was just a stranger in the crowd. I left immediately and had a panic attack in my car, the first one I'd had in years. My therapist squeezed me in for an emergency session that afternoon and asked what the panic attack was really about. "I threw away my last chance," I said. "I'm going to be alone forever." "Is that really what you're afraid of?" she asked. "Or are you afraid that you don't actually know how to love someone?" I didn't go back to therapy after that. The question felt too big, too damning, because what if she was right? What if the problem wasn't timing or age or bad luck, but something fundamentally broken in me? The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. I signed papers in a conference room with fluorescent lighting while Daniel sat across from me, not making eye contact. The lawyer made polite small talk about the weather. The whole thing took 20 minutes. 3 years of marriage dissolved in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. Afterward, I went back to work like nothing had happened. I had a meeting at 2 and a deadline at 5 and a work dinner at 7. I moved through it all on autopilot, smiling when appropriate, contributing to conversations, being professionally competent. No one knew that my marriage had officially ended that afternoon. No one asked if I was okay. At the work dinner, my colleague mentioned she was engaged. Everyone congratulated her, asked about wedding plans, got excited about venues and dresses. I joined in with the appropriate enthusiasm and excused myself to the bathroom, where I cried silently in a stall for 5 minutes before reapplying my makeup and going back out. That night, alone in my apartment, I thought about what Daniel had said at the coffee shop, that he would have chosen me at any age, in any circumstance. I tried to remember if I'd ever felt that way about him and couldn't. I'd chosen him because the timing was right and he wanted what I wanted, and I was afraid of running out of options. I'd chosen him the way you choose a practical car or a sensible investment. And now I was paying for it. The worst part is that I still don't know if I actually regret what I did, or if I just regret getting caught. If Daniel hadn't overheard that conversation, would I still be married? Would I have continued indefinitely, posting happy photos and telling people I was content while feeling vaguely empty inside? Would that have been better or worse than this? I think about the version of me who stayed quiet at that party, who never made that joke, who kept her doubts private. That version is still married, still posting pictures of weekend brunches, still checking the box marked successful relationship. Would she be happier than I am now, or just differently miserable? My mother calls every few weeks to ask if I'm dating anyone. My sister sends me articles about freezing eggs and adoption options. My friends have stopped inviting me to couples events. I've become someone people pity, someone whose life is a warning rather than an inspiration. I thought the hardest part would be losing Daniel, but it's not. The hardest part is losing the story I'd constructed about my life. The story where everything worked out eventually, where my struggles had a happy ending, where being patient and optimistic paid off. Now I'm in a story I don't recognize, one without a clear path forward or a lesson that makes sense. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed single. If I'd made peace with not having a partner, found fulfillment in other areas, stopped seeing marriage as the finish line. Maybe I would have been okay. Maybe I would have eventually met someone I actually couldn't live without, or maybe I wouldn't have, and that would have been fine too. Instead, I rushed into something I wasn't sure about because I was afraid, and now I've hurt someone who deserved better and destroyed something I might have actually wanted if I'd given myself time to want it authentically. I saw Daniel's engagement announcement on social media last month. To the marketing woman with the effortless face, the ring was beautiful. The caption talked about finding real love and second chances. People congratulated him enthusiastically, said he deserved happiness, said they could see how in love he was. I stared at the post for a long time, trying to identify what I felt. Jealousy, definitely. Regret, absolutely. But also, buried underneath everything else, something that might have been relief. Because seeing him that happy with someone else confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I couldn't have made him feel that way. Not because I didn't try, but because I didn't feel it myself. You can't fake the kind of love he's found. I know because I tried for 3 years. My therapist, the new one I started seeing after taking a few months off, asks if I've learned anything from this experience. I tell her I've learned to keep my mouth shut at parties. She doesn't find this funny. What I've actually learned is more complicated. I've learned that you can't reason yourself into loving someone, that checking boxes isn't the same as chemistry, that settling isn't a victimless crime. I've learned that fear is a terrible foundation for a relationship, and that wasting someone's time is crueler than being alone. But I've also learned that everyone settles to some degree, that perfect doesn't exist, that maybe I threw away something good because I was too damaged to recognize it. I've learned that there's no way to know if you made the right choice because you never get to see how the other path would have turned out. I'm 42 now. My eggs are, in fact, practically dust. My dating profile gets fewer matches than it did 4 years ago. I've been on exactly 3 dates in the past 6 months, and none of them led to a second. I spend weekends alone, going to movies by myself, taking long walks, reorganizing my apartment, trying to convince myself that solitude is different from loneliness. Sometimes I imagine running into Daniel and his fiancée somewhere, imagine him introducing her to me. I rehearse what I'd say, how I'd act gracious and mature and happy for him. I picture her being kind but slightly pitying, the way people are when they've won and can afford to be generous. Other times I imagine an alternate universe where I never went to that dinner party, where Daniel and I are still married, still coexisting in comfortable boredom. In that universe, am I happier, or just differently unhappy? The thing nobody tells you about confessing your worst behavior is that it doesn't make you feel better. I've told you everything now that I settled, that I said cruel things when I thought I wouldn't get caught, that I can't figure out if I regret losing Daniel or just regret the security he represented. I've admitted that I don't know how to love people the right way, that I'm afraid I'm fundamentally broken, that I might die alone because I was too damaged or too picky or too something to make it work. And you know what? I still don't have answers. I don't know if I was wrong to settle or wrong to admit it. I don't know if I should have fought harder for my marriage or if letting it go was the kindest thing I could do for both of us. I don't know if I'm capable of the kind of love Daniel found with someone else, or if my version of love is just different and equally valid, or if I'm just making excuses for emotional unavailability. What I do know is that I'm sitting here alone, telling this story to strangers, hoping someone will tell me I'm not the villain. Hoping someone will say they understand, that they've felt these things too, that wanting security doesn't make you a bad person and admitting doubt doesn't mean you never cared. But I also know that's probably not true. That I hurt someone who loved me because I couldn't get out of my own way. That I wasted 3 years of both our lives because I was more afraid of being alone than of being in the wrong relationship. That I said unforgivable things and meant them at least partially, at least in the moment. The divorce is final. Daniel's moving on. I'm here in this strange in-between space, too old to start over but too young to give up, too self-aware to make the same mistakes but too damaged to avoid making new ones. And the worst part, the thing I haven't admitted to anyone including my therapist, is that sometimes late at night I still think Daniel was overreacting. That everyone settles and I was just honest about it. That he should have forgiven me and we could have worked through it and he threw away our marriage just as much as I did. I know that's not fair, I know that's not true, but I think it anyway. Because here's what I've really learned from all of this: you can confess everything, excavate every ugly truth, lay your worst self bare, and still not know if you're the victim or the villain. Still not know if you made a mistake or dodged a bullet. Still not know how to do better next time, or if there will even be a next time. I said I settled because I was getting old. He overheard and filed for divorce. And now I'm exactly what I was afraid of becoming: alone, aging, uncertain, with nothing but hindsight and regret for company. The only difference is now I know that being alone might be better than being with someone you can't fully love. Or it might not be. I honestly can't tell anymore. And that's the truth nobody wants to hear. Sometimes there is no lesson, no growth, no redemption arc. Sometimes you just break something and it stays broken, and you have to live with that forever. I'm still living with it. I'll let you know if it gets easier.